there is some different flares to how the playstyles are, and Luke having a Trick Room oriented team, potentially with some faster Pokemon, so the Glastrier, Regieleki, Tapu Fini, the Urshifu Single Strike, Incineroar, and Dusclops, compared to Israel's side, which is a lot of other, strong, consistent Pokemon in Incineroar, Landorus, and Amoonguss, a Glastrier of Israel's on his side as well, and Galarian Moltres, and of course Regieleki, because why not?
It is one of the best Pokemon in the format, so why not indeed? More importantly for Israel, he brought 5 of the 6 same Pokemon that we saw from him in the regional finals, only switching up the Spectrier and turning it into a Glastrier, which I think was an acknowledgement from Israel that his team maybe didn't have the best Trick Room matchup. Yes, there is the Amoonguss there, and Amoonguss can, Rage Powder attacks for redirection, can go for those spores to put Pokemon asleep, but still, otherwise you have some very fast Pokemon that would struggle with the twist of the dimensions, and we'll have to see if that choice comes into play in this matchup, because like you called out, Luke does have Dusclops and Glastrier on a team together, and especially when you're facing down a team that otherwise would struggle with your Trick Room matchup, having the Dusclops and Glastrier, if not as a lead in the back for that late game Trick Room option that has been so critical throughout this tournament, is going to be huge. So I think going into game 1 here, we're going to see a bit of a fast start from both these trainers, and I would assume that Luke is going to be looking to pivot into that Trick Room whenever he does get the opportunity. So should be a very exciting matchup indeed.
All right, so let's get into game 1 here in the losers bracket between Luke, Iuele, and Israel, Suaste, Guendulain. The loser goes home. The winner is able to keep their tournament hopes alive, and of course that's what both of these trainers are opting for. Luke having Incineroar, Regieleki as his lead in game 1, and Israel with Regieleki, Galarian, Moltres on their side. I was expecting the Moltres here to be a strong answer against Dusclops, but Luke did not lead Dusclops.
He didn't, and I think that was a smart choice on his part. Even though Moltres is not guaranteed to knock out the Dusclops with a single Fiery Wrath, if it does have the opportunity to get those stat boosts up, or alternatively, if it has a hard-hitting partner such as the Regieleki, it could have been possible to pick up that knockout easily. By leading the Incineroar and the Regieleki together, Luke is giving him an opportunity to flinch something on Israel's side of the field, and also an opportunity to set up a light screen or a reflect, because Luke's Regieleki is the only Regieleki that we've seen in this tournament so far with that light clay and those screens together.
No switches on either Luke or Israel's end here on turn 1. Israel will Dynamax the Galarian Moltres Pokemon, very popular for its, its Dynamax usage with either Max Darkness or Max Airstream to boost its speed. Very strong special attacker here in VGC. Fake out from Incineroar, targeting down Israel's Regieleki, so no attack on that end. And Luke's Regieleki with a light screen, if it's holding that light clay item, it's going to affect the special attacks for the next 8 turns. This Max Darkness is a special attack, so you can see Regieleki was able to hang on thanks to the light screen in that position. Will lower the special defense of both Regieleki and Incineroar, though.
More importantly, Regieleki will now not be outsped by the opposing Moltres or the opposing Regieleki in the next turn, thanks to the Max Darkness, not the Max Airstream. This means that Luke could take this opportunity to get some damage down, or possibly even set up the Reflect to complement that light screen, and pivot then on the knockout to the Dusclops, get that Trick Room up, and then go ahead and play through the slower part of this game. A great start for Luke there. I think Israel's looking to deal some consistent damage over the next few turns, but I don't think those Max Darkness special defense drops are going to stick.
No, they won't, as Regieleki switches out thanks to the Volt Switch. Does some solid damage to its resisted electric counterpart there. So that special defense drop is now negated, and in comes Dusclops, one of the bulkiest Pokemon in the entire format, thanks to its EVLA item to boost its defenses there. Thunderbolt a lot of damage into the Incineroar, so even with the light screen, because of the special defense drop, that was a very, very strong attack. Finky Berry will bring it back up to around 50% of its HP, but Max Airstream takes care of the rest.
That knockout there honestly is beneficial to Luke, if only because it gets rid of the necessity of him trying to switch in this Glastrier. He can send it in for free, and unlike other Glastrier in this tournament, Luke's Glastrier does have access to Protect, so he could go for a Protect this turn, he could go for Max Guard this turn if he wants to try and ensure that Trick Room will go up, or if he wants to capitalize on the fact that Israel might double into that Dusclops looking for the 2-hit knockout combination from the Max Darkness and the Thunderbolt. He could go on the offense, maybe score a knockout on that Regieleki, get the Chilling Neigh boost to his attack, and then go for Trick Room later on in this game. All right, and it looks like that Dynamax is going to take the field for Luke. That Glastrier, it's going to take a lot of damage if it's targeted by either of these two Pokemon on Israel's side of the field, but remember, their Dusclops was just present, and Regieleki taking the Thunderbolt for the Dusclops, getting knocked out, and Max Darkness now from that Moltres connecting with the opposing Glastrier. Doesn't do a lot of damage, but that special defense drop is going to start adding up over time if this Glastrier isn't careful.
Glastrier with the Max Quake into Regieleki is a super effective attack, and that will take it out. That's a good knockout. Not only getting the special defense boost that Glastrier would appreciate facing down a Moltres, but also gaining a Chilling Neigh boost as well, increasing its attack by 1 stage. You see the Life Orb recoil as well. So a +1 attack and special defense as well from Glastrier makes it a very strong Pokemon right now.
It does, and the Max Quake as well negated the special defense drop from that Max Darkness, and also gave Luke the opportunity to stall out the remainder of the Moltres' Dynamax turns. So a very, very strong board position for Luke to start going for the speed advantage, to set up this Glastrier so that it will get those Chilling Neigh boosts and score the knockouts needed to win this game 1. Even though Regieleki was taken out by that Thunderbolt quite easily, I don't think Luke was necessarily going to rely on the Regieleki moving forwards in this game. Now that Glastrier is on the field, and especially now that the Glastrier has gone for the Dynamax, it is time to slow things down, twist the dimensions, and give Glastrier the board state that it loves to just get that snowball going.
Fiery Wrath from Moltres, but the special defense boost from the Max Quake really helping out here. Parting Shot, however, from Israel's Incineroar will lower the attack and special attack on the Glastrier, so that Chilling Neigh boost from the previous turn has now been negated. So Glastrier back to just being a regular, very strong attacker, and into the Incineroar slot will be a Glastrier. Glastrier on Luke's end with the Max Hailstorm onto Moltres. This is obviously going to be very, very strong, and it is enough for the clean 1-hit knockout for Luke. So that's now two knockouts here in the last 2 turns for Luke's Glastrier.
And more importantly for the Glastrier, this is an opportunity for it to negate the incoming Intimidate from the Incineroar that will be forced to take the field now that Israel is down to his last 2 Pokemon. Glastrier is in a very unique position on Luke's side of the field where it still has access to Dynamax. It should be able to go for a Max Steel Spike or maybe even a Max Quake to try and get a huge amount of damage down onto the Incineroar or the opposing Glastrier before its Dynamax runs out, and as a result, give Luke a head start in this end game. Both these trainers are down to their last 2 Pokemon, which is going to be super important to keep in mind because that means that this damage is going to be even more critical. The other thing we have to keep an eye out for here as these remaining turns play out is just how these two Glastrier are going to match up against each other. They both have access to close combat. They both have access to consistent damage in that regard at the cost of their defenses. So if Luke's Glastrier is going to outspeed Israel's Glastrier consistently, that could be another point in Luke's favor. We just have to keep an eye on these two Pokemon as these Trick Room turns play out.
Dusclops with a Haze will get rid of all of the stat boosts on the field. It will eliminate any stat changes, bringing everything back to neutral. Max Quake into Incineroar, another knockout for Luke. That is so massive. Obviously, wanted to get rid of that Intimidate, and for a good reason, as that will bring the attack back up onto Glastrier and get another knockout. So that's 3 knockouts, 3 KOs for Glastrier here in game 1. You can't complain about that. It's possible to be even more effective at that point.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that those Chilling May boosts from the prior knockouts haven't stuck, but I think Luke's Glastrier is in a very unique position to go for all 4 knockouts in this game. You don't usually see that happen with these Pokemon from the Crown Tundra. I think that you want it to happen, but a lot of times it's hard to get that board positioning just right. But in Luke's case here, that Dynamax was perfectly timed. He was able to save the Dusclops until the Moltres on the opposing side of the field was no longer a threat and is really just cleaning up at this point in game 1.
Nightshade from Dusclops will target down the Glastrier, doing 50 damage, and then Close Combat takes care of the rest. So this horse is officially on the loose as Luke takes out all 4 of Israel's Pokemon thanks to the Glastrier. So that was an exciting display of what our friend from the Crown Tundra can do in this situation. As a slower Pokemon, you have to set up Trick Room compared to Spectrier, who's super fast. But once you get Trick Room up, who's a better teammate than Dusclops to activate the Trick Room, right? You just let Glastrier clean up throughout the rest of it, and that Luke showed off perfectly why it's so strong.
It was really interesting to see, though, that Luke's Glastrier was consistently outspeeding Israel's Glastrier under Trick Room. Could be an indication of how these Pokemon have been trained, and could be something important for Israel to keep in mind as we go into game 2. I think you have to assume that your opponent is going to be trying to position themselves for that late game Trick Room once again, and ensure that you have the Pokemon available to you that can either stall out those Trick Room turns or otherwise take advantage of the Trick Room. And I don't think Glastrier is going to be that Pokemon for Israel. We did not see the use of Tapu Fini on Luke's side of the field, which means that Amoonguss would be the perfect candidate to come in and try and make this Trick Room a little bit easier for Israel to bear. But it's still going to be a tough adjustment to make, because if you do bring Amoonguss, then you lose a lot of the offensive pressure that the Moltres, Regieleki, and Incineroar all brought.
Well, let's see if Israel is able to adjust here, bring the Amoonguss. Amoonguss is a fan of Trick Room, right? So in game 2, is that the play Israel needs to make to force a game 3? He is now 1 game away. 1 more loss and he'll be sent home, and Luke will move on to the next round in the losers bracket. Luke having Regieleki and Incineroar as their lead, and then Galarian Moltres and Regieleki yet again for Israel, just like we saw in game 1.
Just like we saw in game 1, which means we might see a similar turn 1 to game 1, setting up Light Screen, going for that fake out onto Israel's Pokemon, getting a little bit of chip damage down, but I think more importantly, ensuring that Luke has this extra bulk that really made a difference in the game 1 scenario. Remember that Max Darkness from the Dynamax Moltres was a 2-hit knockout after the Light Screen.
Fake out into Regieleki, yet another Light Screen from Luke, just like we saw in game 1. The fake out's going to flinch Regieleki, and now Nasty Plot from Galarian Moltres. Last time around it went for the Dynamax. This time he's saying, all right, I need the boost to my special attack, and then I can start going for super strong Max Darknesses.
Exactly. The boost to special attack on Moltres means that this Light Screen isn't going to matter as much in terms of its own damage output, and I think puts Luke in a tougher position because it means the Moltres is going to be a bigger threat during those key Dynamax turns. The unfortunate thing about Luke's more defensive Regieleki is that it's not going to be able to use Thunderbolt for big damage. Instead, it's going to be forced to rely on Electro Web for like some speed control to help, or Volt Switch, which will do more damage, but unfortunately at the cost of being forced to switch. And I don't think Luke can afford to switch if it is going to be the Glastrier and Dusclops in the back of his party.
Galarian Moltres with a Protect, which means Israel is expecting either, a Thunderbolt into that slot or something else, but Regieleki instead reflecting that turn, so helping against defensive attacks as well as the Light Screen helped against special ones the previous turn there. So you did have a nice, decent attack from the Regieleki there to bring Incineroar down to half of its HP. But now the Moltres is still in the same spot, right, Gabby? Because it's still threatened by the Thunderbolt.
Yep, it still is just as threatening as it was in the previous turn, and while the Reflect might help out later on in the game, it certainly is not going to change too much at this point in time. If anything, Luke is a bit on the back foot now that the Incineroar is within knockout range from a second attack from the Regieleki. Luke might be forced to let both of his Pokemon get knocked out here by the Pokemon on Israel's side of the field, forcing the Dusclops and the Glastrier out onto the field together, which would certainly be a difficult position to be in.
Thunderbolt making it so that Incineroar lives with 2 HP. So close to a knockout, but not enough, as Incineroar will be able to recover up some of its HP thanks to the Figgy Berry. This Fiery Wrath, though, will bring Regieleki down to half of its HP. Or under half of its HP, I should say. And Parting Shot, Incineroar gets to hang around for another day. Come back in, intimidate something, go for fake out pressure yet again. That was a pivotal 2 HP survival out of Incineroar.
It was, but it does make me wonder about if Luke wanted the double knockout on that turn, or if he didn't want that opportunity to Parting Shot. It almost feels like the Glastrier is on the field a bit early in this game. With Israel not having used Dynamax yet, I think we're in a very interesting position where Luke is forced to Dynamax so that the Glastrier has the bulk to stick around on the field through these attacks, but Israel doesn't necessarily have to go for that Dynamax yet with the Moltres. I think Moltres is very comfortable continuing to use those Fiery Wraths and continuing to chip damage down, and assuming we're heading for a similar end state where it's going to be the Incineroar and the Glastrier in the back of Israel's party, I think this early Dynamax could backfire for Luke. That being said, I think that the Max Hailstorm into the Moltres is a pretty safe option if Israel doesn't match the Dynamax. And, right now it does not look like Moltres has that plan in its mind.
Glastrier will Dynamax for Luke on his end, so no Trick Room is set up, meaning since it's such a slow Pokemon, it's going to be attacking last in the spot. No Dynamax either from Israel. Maybe we were expecting a potential Dynamax, Max Darkness out of that slot, but instead a Protect. And Luke, with a Volt Switch on this turn, will be able to safely get his Regieleki out on the field, switching into Dusclops so that the following turn you can set up Trick Room here. So, understand Luke's game plan in this situation is I need Glastrier with Trick Room set up so it can be very powerful. Thunderbolt into Glastrier actually does some solid damage to it, honestly, but the Max Quake in return will be able to knock out Regieleki there. So now Glastrier gets the Chilling Neigh boost, one, because of its ability, going to increase its attack, critical hit not mattering since Regieleki is so frail anyway, and more importantly here, a special defense boost to both itself and the Dusclops, so now that Nasty Plot's really not even helping as much at this point.
Exactly. The combination of the Parting Shot to lower Moltres' special attack and the Max Quake to boost the special defense of the Pokemon on Luke's side of the field means that this Dusclops is no longer in the danger zone. It doesn't have to worry about getting knocked out by the Moltres or by, Regieleki, but now I guess it's an Amoonguss. The Amoonguss is a problem, though, because Amoonguss is going to outspeed the Dusclops, assuming it goes for Trick Room, as Trick Room attacks at a lower priority tier, which means it'll always go towards the end of the turn. And this Amoonguss, if it is able to connect a Spore to the Dusclops, which it should be able to if that's something that Israel wants to go to, that means that Luke will be unable to set up Trick Room in the 2 turns he has sitting in front of the Moltres at this point in time. He's forced now to target the Amoonguss with an max Hailstorm and just hope that's going to be enough to knock it out in one hit.
Nasty Plot from Galarian Moltres boosting its special attack again. And the Spore from Amoonguss connecting onto Glastrier. Obviously, Glastrier being forced to stay asleep on this its second turn of Dynamax. And no Trick Room from Dusclops. Instead, just a Nightshade into the Moltres slot.
Very, very key to note that the Amoonguss outspeeds the opposing Glastrier. That means that this Amoonguss is, you know, not at its minimum possible speed as many people like to run in VGC, and that's going to be key if we get a game 3. For now, though, we are just left hoping that this Glastrier, for Luke's sake, will wake up quickly so that this Moltres, now I believe it's at +4 thanks to that second Nasty Plot, doesn't just run through the Pokemon remaining on Luke's side of the field.
Yep, that's a very strong Galarian Moltres at this point. You do have the 1 special defense boost from the Max Wake before, but +4 Max Darkness is not enough, and that's the power of Dusclops. Gabby, you and I know very well how strong Dusclops is, that it can endure a +4 super effective Dynamax attack. That says something about this little ghost friend here. But a Spore from Amoonguss will be able to put Dusclops to sleep. Has to stay asleep this turn, so no Trick Room. And Glastrier does not wake up either, so a pretty rough turn for Luke, as now that his Dynamax is over, and really, Moltres is just starting.
Moltres has the opportunity to knock out the Dusclops this turn, which means there will no longer be Trick Room available to Luke. I am not even sure if Luke really wants to go for Trick Room at this point in time, given that his last Pokemon is going to be that Regieleki, but knowing that Regieleki is a more supportive variant, it's going to struggle to find damage against the Amoonguss. Glastrier needs to wake up, and it needs to connect an attack so that this Amoonguss is no longer going to be a problem with the Rage Powders and all of those critical scores.
Max Darkness taking down Dusclops at this point, even though it was asleep. Really, Luke never getting a chance to effectively use Dusclops here in this game too, because he went for the Nightshade the first turn it was out, then he couldn't Trick Room afterwards because it was put to sleep. Icicle Crash, though, from Glastrier does connect onto Amoonguss, which will be super effective and knocking it down to its Focus Sash, which is an item we've actually seen throughout the last couple of years pick up in popularity on Amoonguss. Back in our day, Gabby, Amoonguss was the tankiest thing out there, and you wouldn't even think of a Focus Sash. But with so many big threats here in VGC nowadays, you still run a Focus Sash just in case. So even if you are bulky, you still really have to support your team.
But it goes to show you how critical that Spore was a couple turns earlier on the Dynamax Glastrier, because had that Icicle Crash been a Max Hailstorm, the resulting hail damage to the Amoonguss would have been able to knock it out despite the Focus Sash. There's some really interesting synergy now that Israel has access to if he decides to switch out the Amoonguss this turn, as its ability, Regenerator, will mean that it'll restore a lot of its health. So Amoonguss, even though it doesn't seem like a decent Focus Sash user, it's honestly one of the best.
Double protect on Israel's end, so both the Moltres and Amoonguss protecting, as well as Luke's Glastrier. So the only attack in this turn is Incineroar's Fake Out, which isn't going to matter. So a very defensive turn out of both of the trainers here when Light Screen finally wears off. So that means, I believe we have Reflect up for either 1 or 2 more turns, but Light Screen is now gone, so these Nasty Plots boosted attacks are even stronger.
And most likely the Incineroar will not find an opportunity to an attack this turn as a result. It's going to come down to this Glastrier. If Glastrier can find the opportunity to attack this turn, then that would have been Luke's out. But unfortunately, I think even if that Fiery Wrath wasn't enough to score that 2-hit knockout, the Amoonguss would have just outsped and gone for Spore anyways.
Right, and that's what we see here. The Amoonguss went for Spore anyway, so it didn't really matter as Reflect is... Reflect goes away at this point. It's just Regieleki versus these two Pokemon. Actually, haven't even seen the fourth Pokemon on Israel's end at this point, so this is a really strong position. Israel saying, I will not go down without a fight. I'm going to force a game 3.
And I love the Rage Powder play as well here for the Amoonguss because, you know, Regieleki forced to rely on Electro Web, which isn't going to deal as much damage as Volt Switch. But even if Regieleki did go for that Volt Switch, forcing Regieleki to target the Amoonguss, giving Moltres the opportunity to attack. Not that it needed to get to +6, but, you know, sometimes you just want to flex. Or maybe I should say... +6.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt to get the weakness penalty boost and the Berserk boost on top of your 2 nasty plots from before. So obviously, Regieleki going to get knocked out in this position. Galarian Moltres proving to be the MVP on Israel's end there in that game too. Just a perfect positioning from it. It was on the field the entire time. He had great switches with Regieleki, and from the Amoonguss being faster than Glastrier really put a wrench in Luke's plans for the Trick Room option, right? So that's an adjustment that Luke is now going to have to use in game 3 and say, I know Amoonguss is faster than Glastrier. I need to get Trick Room up in a spot where I'm not threatened by Spore.
Yeah, and I think the way you do that is you bring Tapu Fini and you leave the Regieleki behind. I almost feel like Luke's team is suffering a bit for the fact that this Regieleki isn't able to go toe-to-toe with this Moltres. A lot of times when you see a Galarian Moltres, Regieleki is so powerful, it's able to threaten it immediately off the field. But when you have this Regieleki that is more focused on Light Clay, Light Screen, Reflect, Volt Switch, it just doesn't match the same special attacking potential. Tapu Fini, on the other hand, gets access to Moonblast, can boost up its own stats with Calm Mind, which is sort of like a light screen at the end of the day. And I think that key adjustment will ensure that Trick Room goes up and ensure that Luke has the best possible positioning going into this game 3. If you're on Israel's side of the field, I really like the adjustment in playstyle. I loved how Israel delayed the Dynamax in game 2. I think that's something that you just have to keep up going into game 3 so that you can better respond to your opponent and you're not necessarily locking yourself into a Dynamax Moltres when you could take the opportunity to get up a nasty plot or 2.
Well, let's see how this series plays out between Luke and Israel going into game 3 here in the losers bracket. Both these trainers, whoever goes home should still be proud because they have made it to global finals of Players Cup 4. But of course, you know, you still want that chance. You want the ability to win this match and try to prove yourself as the best player in the tournament. Luke has Incineroar, Regieleki yet again, and shocker, Gabby, it's Regieleki Moltres on Israel's side.
Yeah, 3 games, 3 leads, identical, but I think different outcomes per each turn 1. We've seen Luke rely on Fake Out quite consistently paired with Light Screen, but the Fake Out has always been targeted towards Israel's Regieleki, and it looks like Luke mixed it up this turn, but Israel's going for a mix-up of his own.
Incineroar, Fake Out into Moltres' Protect there, so great Protect call from Israel, and Light Screen from Luke's Regieleki will be able to help against those special attacks that hurt it so much in the previous game. Thunderbolt, though, into Incineroar brings it down to under half of its HP, but this is the exact same scenario we saw in game 2, Gabby, where Incineroar went to under half, and then the second Thunderbolt didn't knock it out. It actually hung on at 2 HP, so you know that this is a potential damage roll in this spot.
It is, and also you know that the Moltres, having gone for Protect in the previous turn, did not take the opportunity to go for a nasty plot, and that's going to be key to keep in mind as well.
Reflect from Regieleki, just trying to set up both screens, understanding both of the Pokemon on the field are special attackers right now, so it won't matter, but potentially it will matter later on. And this time around, Israel does get the KO onto Incineroar. No 2 HP survival for Luke, and Incineroar goes down without ever providing any utility in this matchup. Nasty plot from Galarian Moltres. This turn, he was safe to go for it since Regieleki went for the Reflect. And now Glastrier is switched in down 4-3 in Pokemon with the Moltres really strong at this point. Is it time to Dynamax, or do you go for another Nasty Plot?
I think you go for another Nasty Plot. I think you have to be a little bit greedy in this position because Glastrier, you assume that Glastrier is going to go for the Dynamax again. And if you think back to turn 2, our game 2 of this tournament, the Glastrier prioritized the knockout on the Regieleki with Max Quake, which boosts this. You just end up that much more comfortable.
Moltres protecting on this turn, threatened by both Glastrier and Regieleki at this point. The Thunderbolt, though, from Regieleki on Israel's end targets down the Regieleki on Luke's side, and Max Quake from Glastrier is going to take out this Regieleki here. So a bit of a non-effective protect. Not as strong of a showing in Game 3 for Regieleki as well, since it gets knocked out to this Max Quake. And now Glastrier has the attack boost and its special defense boost, and the Moltres is still just +2 and still super effectively threatened by both of these Pokemon.
Yeah, it was a good play from Israel to respect the fact that the Glastrier could have targeted the Moltres in the previous turn, and especially knowing that you have Amoonguss in the back to pivot to, I think takes a lot of the pressure off the field. You don't have to worry as much about the Glastrier getting those knockouts and going for the big damage thanks to Chilling Neigh if you know that you could put the opposing Pokemon to sleep like we saw in Game 2. But fortunately, we're on Luke's side of the field, which means we actually know what that last Pokemon is going to be, and dare I say, I don't think anybody's going to sleep tonight.
Certainly not, as Tapu Fini will switch into this slot, setting up Misty Terrain. And while Misty Terrain is on the field, all grounded Pokemon cannot be affected by status conditions. So if Amoonguss goes for a Spore into the Glastrier slot this turn, it will not be affected by the Nasty Plot from Moltres, though. That is a second Nasty Plot boost. That's now +4 in its special attack stat. And the Spore he fell for, Glastrier is surrounded by the Misty Terrain, so not going to be affected. And Max Hailstorm into the Moltres slot, being able to hit it and take it down there. So it will set up the Hail at this point. Going to actually break the Focus Sash, which you pointed out was important earlier in Game 2 that was not there with Hail, right, on Amoonguss. So this time around, a huge turn. Israel kind of calling that his Moltres was safe that turn to click Nasty Plot, and it turns out not to be the case.
Yep, and it even gets worse as this Amoonguss, a lot of times Amoonguss will have access to Sludge Bomb or maybe even a Giga Drain or something to handle this Tapu Fini matchup, but in Israel's case, the Amoonguss only has access to Pollen Puff, which is a bug type attack, so not going to do a lot of damage. Will give him some opportunity to heal back health on the Glastrier, which really is Israel's only Pokemon that can take advantage of Dynamax at this point in time, and that's going to be key. But if Glastrier on Luke's side of the field is able to take advantage of the knockouts it's already gotten, if it's able to power through and connect an attack with Israel's Glastrier, even through the Dynamax, I think Luke has a way into the next round here of the loser's bracket to keep his tournament alive.
Israel down to his last hopes, and that is his own Glastrier on his side, going for a Dynamax here. So he will have 2 more turns of Dynamax after Luke's Glastrier is done. Protect from Amoonguss will be able to secure that, any damage it takes will only be a quarter of the damage it is supposed to take this turn. And Calm Mind from Tapu Fini, it's time to start setting up on Luke's end, increasing his special attack and special defense by 2 stages. Max Knuckle from Israel's Glastrier into Luke is really not doing too much damage at this point. You kind of effectively have to use 3 Max Knuckles to knock it out at that point. And Glastrier with a Max Quake into Israel. There's a lot of Glastriers on the field. There's a lot of Ice Horses right now. Glastrier will gain a special defense boost on Luke's end, and so they're kind of traded evenly on this turn. I would say that maybe Luke won out on that exchange because he was able to get a Calm Mind off on his Tapu Fini for free.
It's tough to say because now you're in this awkward position where the Amoonguss can go for Rage Powder and the Glastrier on Israel's side of the field is still Dynamax and will be able to attack and take advantage of the additional attack power that those max moves provide. The unfortunate thing for Israel, though, is that Close Combat turns into Max Knuckle, which, while it does boost the user's attack upon using it, it has one of the lowest base powers of all of these max moves. So it's gonna take a couple of hits to get through Luke's Glastrier. And if Luke can knock out the Amoonguss this turn, I think all it's gonna take is a Close Combat for him to move on.
Rage Powder from Amoonguss, another Calm Mind out of the Tapu Fini, so it's +2 now. This is 2 turns in a row now that Israel's Glastrier has outsped the opposing Glastrier. Max Knuckles still not enough, even without the Dynamax boost to the HP stat. The Max Knuckles still not taking out the Glastrier. Ice Cold Crash does connect on to Amoonguss though, so that will be super effective and knocking Amoonguss down. So now it is Israel and his Glastrier, his last stand in the Players' Cup right now. One Pokemon down. He has one final turn of Dynamax. If you use it to Max Knuckle, I would expect Max Knuckle to even knock out, like, you know, through Protect or something like that. But whatever attack you want to go for, if you target down Glastrier, you would essentially get a 4th attack boost because of the Chilling Neigh boost on top of it.
I think you have to go for the Glastrier because you still have to worry about this Tapu Fini, and the Regieleki is still around on Luke's side of the field as well. Assuming Glastrier does get knocked out by Israel's Dynamax Glastrier, that means Regieleki can come in, and most importantly, Regieleki can use Reflect, which means all Tapu Fini has to do is just survive long enough to bring Luke forwards.
Max Quake into Tapu Fini's Protect there, so it does almost negligible damage at this point, giving yourself a special defense boost, which I understand because you want that, but then the Close Combat, because of the Chilling Neigh boost from before, just takes it out. So I feel like the Glastrier would have been the better slot because you would have knocked it out through Protect if it went for it. You would have knocked out Regieleki if it switched in that spot, and at that point, sure, you got your special defense boost.